It's a very interesting editorial cartoon that we have in the Star. Dr. Shem Ochodo was lauding the government for going paperless. The other paperless cabinet, this is, of course, the other paperless cabinet reflecting back on Uhuru Kenyatta. This is what we have today inside the Star. And just to talk about the cabinet, we're given to understand that it has okayed 300 billion shillings budget cut to tame rising debt. The president has been categorical on austerity measures in his government, and the cabinet has so far approved a supplementary budget aimed at cutting government spending by 300 billion shillings as a measure of containing the fiscal deficit. The Kenya Kwanza Governing Council says the proposed fiscal consolidation will be key to rationalizing national debt, currently at 8.7 trillion shillings as the country approaches the 10 trillion shillings borrowing cap set by Parliament last June. And we want to continue the conversation on currently what had raised before we took a short break on Central Bank of Kenya, expecting Kenya's foreign exchange market to be stable this year, primarily due to a reduction in the current account deficit. And we have the governor saying that the deficit, which improved to 4.9% of GDP at the end of last year, is forecasted to reach 5.4, I should say, this year, close to the ideal level. And he attributes this to high export from tea and manufactured goods, as well as an increase in remittances. And this is what we want to just discuss so far, looking at the tea sector, looking at the remittances as well, and the ideal level that the cabinet is talking about. If we may remember also, we have the Bretton Woods Institution, which is revising also their growth project from 5.4 to around 4 point, I can't remember the actual figure. Right. But let me just pick it up with Dr. Shem Ochodo. First of all, on the value addition that we began the show talking about,
right.
on tea and coffee, before you go to diaspora.
That's right. Actually, the congestion tax. Allow me also to chime in and say, I think in principle, it's a good idea that we regulate how much more we pollute the environment. We have a lovely country and a lovely region. We'd want to keep it less. Of course, that climate change has affected us with even the high temperatures at the moment in the city is a clear testimony to the fact that there is a problem. So for me, as long as it's not exorbitant, if there is, the intention is good, that we need to discourage motorized or personal driving cars or motorcycles or whatever in town, if we could do otherwise, if we could use public transport. Of course, even the congestion. I remember one African large city where I have witnessed the worst traffic jam. 4 hours just to get to downtown. Of course, Nairobi may not have reached that stage. Sometimes it really gets bad, and I support the idea of more expressways. Not only on Gong Road, maybe on Langata Road, to be selfish as well. But having said that, even in terms of planting more trees, a better environment is good for us. So even though obviously the West, of course, are the major culprits in this regard, even though our contribution is very small, 3%, as you say, but we suffer perhaps the most in terms of the consequences. So whatever we can do in our own area, it gives us a higher moral ground to challenge the rest to do well. But also in terms of selective tax exemption or amnesties or whatever it is that's given to past heads of state, my thinking is that this having all animals are equal, but some more equal, is, for me, it's not justifiable. Why should companies or past heads of states be exempted? I mean, one may say, okay, well, they did a great service to the country, but that then needs to cascade downwards. I've seen former councillors suffering. I've seen former MPs, former ministers. I think recently there was a story of a former very eminent person queuing at Kenyatta National Hospital. So if there is, for me, the thing is there needs to be justice and equity. Let it to be everyone. If we are going to honor those who have served the country in one stage or the other, past president was very unfair in my view to refuse to sign a bill that was giving pensions to former MPs. Yet, of course, for past presidents and other leaders, or the VVIPs have very favorable perks that they take away. So if it's going to be the case, let it be, because the truth is that once one's a politician, they're not employable. It's very difficult to employ a former councillor or a former MCA. But as a country, we can say, okay, how about people who don't have jobs? So if everybody's paying tax, let everybody pay tax. Of course, exemptions can be, I think the bill being proposed is saying, how about exempting persons with disabilities and so on and so forth. Those are special cases that merit consideration. Coming to the aspect of the remittances, obviously.
Let's go before the remittances. We go to the tea sector and the coffee sector,
right?
Which I know also Dr. McPhee is big on as well.
Right.
We're talking about this value addition.
Yes,
we've seen that.
Correct.
The governor is talking and loading that particular sector for the export. But the value addition,
sure,
will it not also attract any sort of taxation?
Yeah, maybe I begin from the premise of we shouldn't assume that MPs aren't farmers. Some MPs are actually farmers. But of course, I fully agree that the aspect of the shoe wearer being consulted is key. And I must say that the mere fact that we are talking about these issues, the public participation, the opportunity that we're being given to talk about these issues are key. And then, of course, engaging the actual tea farmers and those involved in the value chain. Of course, as a principle, value addition is something that, again, I'm not an economist, I wouldn't pretend to be one, but from what I hear, if you are selling a product and then you give it out raw, and then somebody else adds value and sells it back to you at 100 times what they paid to buy it from you, that's a bit unfair. So obviously, moral value addition is necessary, but also we need to make the environment right to protect the manufacturers. Because if we kill the manufacturers, then we're killing the country. So our taxation must be friendly to the manufacturers. So to that extent, I'll always be on the side of Kenya Association of Manufacturers. But of course, bearing in mind that they have the very benefit, the very basic, in terms of giving to Caesar what Caesar's, that has got to go, but it shouldn't be overdone.
Okay, I don't know where to pick this up from, but...
Let me pick it up from the point of we've also been encouraging and to incentivize the manufacturing sector, because for the longest time, I think they've plateaued in terms of growth or
contribution.
Contribution to the GDP. And now we have the excess duty, which they're saying, no, we are rejecting the excess duty. We're talking about different facets also, maybe for the farmers and the tea sector and the manufacturing. This is the value addition that is bound to also attract another tax obligation.
Okay. This is a very important matter. As a principle, we should maximize value addition, net value addition. By net, I mean that as you seek value addition, you incur certain costs. And you want to look at the unit return and say, am I now better off having moved the extra stage of further processing or further transformation of this product, seeking value addition? Am I going to earn more or less? Value addition, net value addition must be maximized. We can't be a country that simply exports these things to the European capitals with the old colonial model and have them do what we could have done. I want to give an example. I used to work many years ago, it's almost 30 years now. I was doing some work on Ghana in the cocoa industry, reforms in the cocoa sector. It's analogous to tea, although the transformation of the pods of cocoa and coffee are deeper than those of the leaf. But it also did require value addition argument. There's a big value addition argument. And the question was that European consumers of cocoa wouldn't buy cocoa processed in Ghana. For heaven's sake, they said. That has to be processed in Europe. for it to attract the value that we need. So what the Ghanaians should do, and this is a recommendation that came from some source, maybe they should establish industry in Switzerland. And as it turned out, there was an offer in Portugal that if the Ghanaians shipped their cocoa to Portugal and was processed there, it would go to the market, hit the market with a premium than if it was done in anywhere within the territory of Ghana. There are attitudes that we can't wish away, but the reality about consumers and how they put a premium on sauce and things like that, where that was done, you first check where is this manufactured, oh, that must be good, and so on and so forth. Those are things we still have to struggle with. But there's no question that if you can internalize within your territory some value addition, you're likely, because you have expanded the chain, to gain employment, to employ a few more people, and you may also be able to capture part of the value. Now, why is this nuance for me important? If there are cases in which bad processing can lead to a product that is on the market that has no premium at all, and you probably find that you would have been better off if you had stopped a stage earlier. I'll not give the examples in the what do you call it, cashew nuts, for example. There were times in the 70s here in Kenya when we had some discussions and debates. Should Kenya harvest and export cashew nuts and let others, quote unquote, process? I don't know how much processing and value addition there is on cashew nuts, or should it in fact increase the processing chain within Kenya? And so the arguments at that time were, no, we can't do it well. Let us export until we are able to process and actually add a premium to it. These are complex issues, not quite complex, but are issues that we have inherited attitudes that we are coming of age as countries, and it's difficult to get into this club where you will get acceptance when you sell a processed product. That's in the case of tea, and I defer to Professor here. London at one time was the major source of premium teas around the world. The Sri Lankas, India consumes most of its tea, but even in exports, we were just dealing with volumes and so on. And then we Kenyans consoled ourselves by saying, our tea is such high quality. This is used mostly in blending and that kind of thing. But still implicit in it, we couldn't be producers of those. We have a premium tea, but we can't produce to the market directly. Those premiums that come from, when they leave Kenya, they can arrive at the table, at the supermarket and at the table. There are attitudes around it that I think we need to look at. Then there is the economics of it, of course. In every specific situation, you have to look at it and see where it's worth or not. Countries like Sri Lanka, I think, have taught us these examples, partly because of politics. They weren't even able to access markets after appearing to be doing value addition. There wasn't much room there. It's like you bring it to us to get that value addition, but you're not going to take it if you aim to get us the tea bag for the table and so on. So there are many things we can, as we drill down the value addition question, to summarize, I think value addition should be pursued whenever the net value addition is of benefit. We know the reasons why sometimes we can't export finished goods is because those countries won't do the finishing to put the whatever the market premium is, whether it is taste, it is well, taste is the big thing, but there may be other tastes that lead people to demand the good. They feel they can do it better, but that's a matter of, in a sense, within the marketplace, it's a negotiating chain. Like that cocoa thing in Ghana. The offer in Portugal was you Ghanaians can own this in Portugal, we'll process and grind it there, and then you can sell it as your product, but from Portugal. But you can't do it in Accra, or you can't do it in Ghana, rather. If you did that, people are going to buy your cocoa. Where in Africa are they going to grind and have a premium? Are they going to do well? Those were the kinds of arguments. It's only 30 years ago. Now, 30 years may appear a long time, but I'm saying it's of current age. So there are considerations there that we have to break through. But we want to do so in a manner, of course, that is
But with passage of time, because I'm just trying to think like when we're talking about tea, and coffee. Let's just center on tea, because I'm looking at that particular sector, and we have this value addition word that is being bandied and become very sexy right now. Everyone is talking about value addition, value addition. Just how much of value addition can you now put it on tea? Because I think it's gone full orbit. I don't know, but maybe if, in terms of packaging, in terms of taste, I'm trying to look at tea.
Yeah, I happen to have been in that industry briefly, because I tried to export tea.
Yes.
Well, I've been in tea since 2017. You know, the value addition has two aspects. The farmer, of course, it's that side, if you look at it, it's an important thing, because then the farmer gets more revenue, jobs are created, and this is what the government looks at. But the other side is, this is not the government that can put up factories. It must be an investor who can and puts in a factory and says, okay, I need to make tea, brand it, package it, and export it. But two issues arise always. One, many countries, in the same way you want value addition in your country, the other countries also want value addition in their country. They will not accept, many countries will not want already packaged and branded products coming in from another country. They want you to import bulk tea and put up your own packaging plants, and you do your own blending and packing and everything in their own country. So the countries to which we export, Pakistan, Egypt, Sudan, I've gone through some of those countries, they have their own manufacturing companies where they import the bulk tea and then package in the same way UK imports the bulk and then they package it, and you send it out. The Lipton tea you see all over the world, all these things is part of the bulk tea that goes from Kenya to all those destinations. So for those countries themselves, they want it also in the same way you want value addition. They want to encourage their people to do value addition. Now, the second thing about value addition here is the cost. For me as an investor to put up, because the government has created that environment. They have set up EPZs in Mombasa, in Nairobi, for you to put up those kind of things for export. But still, we have not been competitive. I have tried. When you try to put up a plant in order to package, because tea, is one plant, but when you talk about tea, then it comes into almost 200-300 different types, so you call them grades, but they're types, and it comes from the same tea. So it all depends on the way you blend it, and the blending, it comes after you have done the process of manufacturing it. All that curing process and all that, it creates different types of teas. So in Kenya, our tea is mainly the black tea, what we call the CTC, the black tea, which is the one we're the largest exporters in the world of this tea, as opposed to Sri Lanka that manufactures mostly the orthodox, but it's from the same type of tea. So even in this country, now the second thing about this value addition is that cost. There's the cost of power. There's the cost of finance. There are other costs, related to freight and transportation and all those things. When you add up all these costs, you find you still cannot compete. For example, I've tried to sell my tea in Saudi Arabia, for example, one of the largest consumers of tea. You can't compete with Sri Lanka. They'll bring at a more competitive price the same tea, the same grade, because people ask for a certain quality and certain grades, and every country has its own. I mean, the tea that Somalia uses, for example, it's not the same one that is used in Egypt or in Sudan, or the one that is used in Saudi or in Turkey. Every country, depending on, they have their own tests, and so you develop. That's why you have tea testers and all those labs to create that blend of the tea that is required by that particular customer. But you find we cannot compete, and it's because of the different types of costs that production that are involved. So government can say, if that is there, you don't pay tax, do these things, but still, the idea of you try to put up, you find you can't compete. So this is why people are not doing it. So the government cannot force value addition to an investor. I mean, the environment, they have to address a lot of issues really that impact on that competitiveness. This is why we keep talking about competitiveness, and the government must look at it holistically. You just can't look at, I've given you, if you said you're not paying tax, okay, I don't pay tax, but what about the other costs? I can't compete, because every country has that, by the way. If I take my tea to one country, the country also gives their people a similar environment in which to process duty-free. You don't have any taxes. They provide you water. They provide, like Egypt now. I mean, you can't try to export packed one, because they would give their people opportunity to process it in their own, zones where they are exempted from all those, and the government gives you free power, you're given water, you're given this and that, and the cost of labor is cheap, because when the cost of labor is high, it's not necessarily because our people are more expensive. Sometimes it's because of the tax levels. You reach the highest tax rate, 30%, the moment you reach 100,000. So I think there are so many factors. So it becomes
there's a limitation on how much value addition you can do.
So you can talk about it until the cows come home, but you cannot do it if you don't address all the challenges regarding, and this, you look at maize, forget about tea and coffee. We can produce maize that is more competitive, that is cheaper than Uganda. We have to import it from Uganda because it's cheaper. Yet we are using the same kind of soil next to each other. Busia, Uganda is there, and Busia, Kenya, but you cannot be competitive because of so many other factors. So I think we need to look at those issues that affect agriculture in general, and that sometimes makes it very difficult to. We tried cashew nuts. There was a cashew nuts factory in Kilifi. So the government said no export of raw cashew nuts. Everybody must process it there. But the cost of processing of that thing, because it was a state corporation, dilapidated, not modern technology-wise, it became, you can't compete. So people find it's cheaper to send out the raw one, and eventually that factory collapsed. So there are many factors really that impact. I like taking the example of Dubai. In 1998, I tried to get export tea to Dubai. Let me tell you, those guys, they put up at the EPZ in Jebel Ali, they put up their own tea processing zones, and the government provides most of the facilities, complete. So they are now the largest exporters of tea in the world. In fact, about 60-70% of tea in a country like Saudi now comes from Dubai. Because they've given, they've set up so many facilities for processing that makes it very cheap for you to process and package. Because packaging also, paper, the cost, there are so many factors.
Yes.
Right now, one of the biggest packagers of tea here, one of the most famous, like Carito Gold, they told me they get their pepper from Sri Lanka. You've seen that paper, looks very nice. So a lot of costs really.
That's synthetic,
yeah, a lot of costs are involved. So you can talk about it, but if we are not competitive holistically in our cost of production, then you cannot talk about value addition. Some things, yes, like nuts now, nuts. We export a lot of nuts, and you've got to EPZ at the river, you find a lot of factories, people trying to package nuts. Even tea, there are people, farms who have now gone value addition. If you go to the airport, you find very expensive coffee and tea packaged. You see tea, coffee going for $4, $5 at the duty-free shops. Made in Kenya, and some of the farms have done their own value addition, but it's so expensive, you cannot just send it to every other country. You have to get a niche market in Europe or in US for you to sell it, at $4, $5 a kilogram of special tea and special coffee, that orthodox tea, the long ones and so forth. So I think it's not an easy thing, but the government needs to address generally the entire, business environment. This is why manufacturers, raising about all this cost of production and the competitiveness of the country.
So it's not really an easy peasy road to journey on, as we hear. Confluence of factors that have to be given consideration. You in this sector yourself, Dr. McPhee.
Well, you see, if you go back a few years, Unilever wanted to put up a tea processing factory and produce Lipton tea in Mombasa. So what happens? Well, you go to tell the governor of Mombasa County, and he says, well, you begin by giving me $1 million shillings. Then there's NEMA, the National Environmental Management Agency. You have to go through a very expensive process because, we are now complying with Western standards, etc., etc. But in fact, when you actually are undergoing the NEMA process, they can stop everything. And so, the result is that NEMA comes in, then you have KRA, which brings all sorts of problems. There was just problem after problem after problem. As Villa was saying, that factory is now operating in Dubai. So Kenya's loss is Dubai's gain. And, we are talking about cashew nuts, all right? Let me go to a slightly different area, pyrethrum. The farmers used to run the pyrethrum board. In 1996, we earned, if you turn it into Kenya shillings of today, we earned 8.4 billion shillings from our exports of pyrethrum. If you go to put pyrethrum into Google, just do it, you'll see that Kenya is the world's premier supplier. In fact, it's no longer the case. Why? Because the government took over. Now, it's easy to blame the government, but, the point is it's Tom, Dick, and Owino who are in the pyrethrum board, and they say, man, this is incredible money. So they then started buying their Pajeros, their Prados, their Mercedes, etc., with the farmers' money. Now, when I'm a farmer, and if you take one of the former finance controllers of the Nation Media Group, he actually paid all of his school fees from his father's pyrethrum. But I'm a pyrethrum farmer. I get no money from my pyrethrum. What do? I start growing maize instead because I've got to feed my family. I don't have the cash any longer. So this thing of corruption, and let's face it, in examinations in Kenya we have corruption. Mind you, they have it in, Ernst & Young has just been fined in the United States $300 million because the people in the firm were actually cheating in an ethics examination. Ethics. It's a good one. So the thing is, this is a worldwide problem. But I think we've got to understand, today, in 1996, we had more than 200,000 farmers living from pyrethrum. Today, that number is less than 20,000. Our exports last year, 2021, because we don't have the number yet for 2020, was 100 million shillings. Now, who are the major producers of pyrethrum today? Tanzania, 38%. Rwanda, I can't remember how many percent. Papua New Guinea, again. But between the three of those countries, they produce 80% of the world's pyrethrum today. Kenya, 8%. 8% from 70%. So here you have, once again, a policy, the government has got to look after you. But, Tom, Dick, and Owino in the government, are they going to look after you? They probably will steal from you. Cashew nuts. We built this factory. There is a demand for cashew nuts in the world today. The nut market actually has gone down because of COVID. It's really depressed, okay? Macadamia, there's another problem. I'll mention that in a moment, okay? But the position here, okay, is because of the recession, people are consuming fewer nuts, okay, in the United States and in these developed countries. So the price, I know a farmer in Karatina, he's uprooted his macadamia nut trees and he's planted avocado instead because he earned more than 1 million shillings last year from avocado. And he's a really good farmer, this man. His son is actually a lawyer, but boy, he's a really, really efficient farmer. But the point is, you see, the government takes over the cashew nut factory, runs it into the ground, and we destroy the industry. So the point here really is there's a demand for cashew nuts. I know a past student of Strathmore who owns a farm 1,500 acres south of Mombasa. I said, look, you plant cashew nut trees and he's already got some, okay, but, he's neglected it. But there's a tremendous demand in the world for that. Now, you see, our MPs, they're saying, value addition. It's somewhere in today's standard.
Yes.
Value addition. Bonnie, you know nothing, man. You know nothing about anything. And you're an MP. You don't even educate yourself. You don't go and talk to a man like Martin Ocheng or James Murithi, okay, who works in the coffee industry. These are people who know. And the point, of course, is, what Billo was mentioning. For example, Martin Ocheng travels to the tea producer but consumer in the UK. They say, look, test our tea. Okay, this is good enough. We'll use it to blend. Now, are we going to blend in Mombasa? No. Why? Because the governor, NEMA, KRA, KEPSA, not KEPSA, sorry. But all the different, and what Billo says, the oil industry here, you've got 9 different types of taxes. He himself has got 4 different types of taxes. This is all paperwork. This is, we can be penalized in 4 different directions. So, we've got to try to understand, we've got to become, some people talk about, well, there being an entrepreneurial entity. And, it's very easy to speak. It's very easy to speak. And, it's very easy to speak as the governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. Is he aware of the fact that, for example, coffee production? I was talking to a coffee farmer from Kiambu. Last year, that is, when we go back to 2021, between September and November, he was picking 20 tons of coffee a day. In 2022, he's picking 2 tons a day because of the drought. Not only that, Brazil has come back very strongly into the coffee market. We were selling some of our coffee at $7.53 a year. Professor Kea was very proud to get $6.75, in Korea. Well, actually, sell it in the coffee exchange in Nairobi, you get more. You'll get almost $1 more for your coffee. And not only that, I think, one of the premier coffees in the United States is Blue Mountain coffee produced up by Dorman. They pack it in Kenya and they export it there. Now, our tea is not suitable for Americans drink a lot of tea. 28% of the world, of the American market is held by Argentina. We have 2.5%. So in this particular case, if you cool Kenyan tea, it clouds. So it's not suitable, you see. So, we've got to know all of this before we start talking about value addition. And keep in mind what Bilo was mentioning. He's so right. It's expensive to do business in Kenya. Why? Because Nairobi County are at the door to see whether your goods have expired or not. You're being distracted from your business all the time. Cashew nuts. We have an industry there. It's an area where we've got growth potential. But the government does it, and does the government do anything?
Thank you. Thank you.
Something to say about this. Having a national conversation, particularly with the sectors concerned, is the way to go, in my view. In fact, the problem gets even more aggravated. I was talking to a businessman who says, even court litigation, you have a matter, commercial matter, it takes 4 or 5 years before it's resolved. So the entire governance issues need to be looked at. But perhaps more importantly, the holistic, what are the issues? I would be a little more optimistic than pessimistic, that while we may not solve all those problems, as a country we must get what are the key ones to start addressing. I was delighted while in Mombasa last week to have a feel of the infrastructure, the investment the government has put up on Dongo Kundu. How do we convert that into an asset that brings factories into Dongo Kundu and brings jobs into Dongo Kundu? And I think there must always be a balance. I agree that other countries want those companies and factories in their countries, but there can also be a balance. Why not half-half, Tell, if it's a Portuguese company, if you want to buy our tea, come and set up here in Kenya. You can still, of course, promote it back in Portugal. We know this is a Portugal brand. It's from our company. We have met those certain standards. So a little bit of both really is the way to go. The day before yesterday, we were privileged to be hosted by the High Commissioner of Barbados. I was surprised to learn that, and I stand to be guided, I may miss the figures here, but he gave the impression that for Barbados, the growing sugar, on an acre you get a ton. In Kenya, at best you get a quarter of a ton per acre. So the question is, why is that? We probably have a little better land. And I gathered that Barbados, 350,000 people, the land mass size about Lake Naivasha. While Kenya's GDP, we are talking of $2,000 per capita, Barbados $17,000 per capita. just the size of Lake Naivasha. So obviously, if it's technology that they're using well, and of course from the West Coast, the Caribbean is only 4 hours. I think there's quite a bit that we need to learn from each other if it's technology and even investments. Let's use a bit of that. Maybe finally in this regard, looking at a few value chains. Let's pick a few. Let government, the new administration, take a few. If it's tea, if it's horticulture, maybe one or two others. The entire value chain, how do we convert them to be profitable? But obviously, I do agree that the issue of taxation is not good. If there are the other impediments, if it's the cost of electricity, if it's the cost of labor, of course it can't be our people are some of the lowest paid, but the tax loaded on them, on income tax and so on, all those need to be looked at. Well, maybe not say all, but the key ones need to be addressed so that we start becoming an attractive manufacturing center. There are no two ways about it.
Bunyasi, is it below or I think I've lost my sequence? It's Bunyasi Sakwa.
Okay.
Below.
That is an interesting discussion, I must say. I think we have agreed even in this discussion that how much value addition you can do within your territory is implicitly a negotiable thing. You pull one direction, the other side also pulls their direction. And there's no doubt that therefore we're doing the right thing by aiming for value addition. We're aiming to do what the UK wants to do, what we also want to do, but we don't have the same environment. And by, for example, aiming to increase value addition or saying that's the direction we should go, the impediments become more obvious. Impediments may be quality of infrastructure, extensive taxation that will probably be a disincentive in the process of establishing that value addition, and many other factors. Now then the next question is, even if there is legislation in Parliament, I don't think the parliamentarians need to know all of this detail. They meet a lot with the actors in the sectors, I can tell you.
Sure.
But what will happen then, there are implications for implementing it. It would require that, for example, your power costs cannot be what they are for you to be competitive, so you begin to focus on the cost of power. It can be, for example, there may be, I don't know about labor costs are related to productivity, but you can begin to look at those. Roads and so on. If you're in Nigeria, just to give an anecdote, and you are investing somewhere, you're not going to rely on the grid supply.
Sure. You
have essential to establish your own power source, your own, it'd be thermal, your own supplies for fuel and other. You do that. You have to have that on your own.
Sure.
The state will not be able to provide for you. Water supply, and many countries have those problems. In other countries, those are taken care of by other systems, which are paid also by taxes in some way, or by consumers in another. So I think that, for me, this points towards a direction we need to go, which then opens up a whole kind of problems that we have to sort, and that's what we are all about. So I really think that the question of value addition, that should be the direction we go.
Sure.
I want to give a last quick example on meat. There was a time, and by the way, I think in the case of meat, we have gone down rather than up. Many years ago, Kenya Meat Commission used to process meats and was able to export meat to many countries that took carcasses rather than live on hoof as we do in the Middle East. And when that was happening, there were requirements. We had disease-free zones. We had fattening areas out here in Naivasha, Nakuru, and so on. These were various zones where the cows would have had to have gone through and be cleaned up, so to say, disease-wise, before their meats were eligible to enter export markets. But now we have kind of slid there. We have slid as part of our general collapse in governance over the years.
Right.
Now we can pick this up again. Sure. If we have these as goals, but now we revisit those issues and we find out what to do. And there are limits to it. There may be limits to it because how much finishing can you do? And will it now, for example, Europeans are very strict on phytosanitary questions, sometimes for protection purposes, but sometimes for health reasons and so on. Can we meet those? If we can't, maybe we should look elsewhere. We should sell our meats where their requirements, their standards would accommodate our meats. So there are questions to be considered. But in every respect, That goal then sets the agenda of what else to look at. And that what else to look at now becomes our areas of focus to facilitate that outcome. I think the idea of having those goals set at high levels,
Sure.
I think it's important to give us a direction.
Indeed. We do for our session break, Bill Okero, massive discussion we're having here. And when we circle back a bit, we'll turn our focus also on the special economic zones that they have the tax breaks, but also the consumer rate export from these zones. They're not really up to par. So should KRA also investigate some of these zones where you have the tax breaks, but we have no exports that will give back, some remittances to the country as well, and you're enjoying the tax holiday. We take a short break. Also, the housing or the real estate as well, is market correcting itself? We can see the mortgages are bound also to go up as far as the interest rates is concerned by 5%. How will that also affect some of the people who are servicing mortgages in this country and the entire real estate, also the market value dipping? Don't go away. You're watching Sokoni here.
This is like your position. Good.